Hello, 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 y'all. I am fortunate enough to be here today with Mr. Chris. I'm not going to steal his thunder. Chris, who are you and what the heck are you doing here today?
Hey, I'm Chris Widener, and I'm really happy to be able to be here with you, Ryan. I've been a professional speaker since 1988. I started speaking to youth primarily because I had a crazy upbringing 28 homes, 11 different schools, shipped off to live with relatives twice, started drugs in the sixth grade. And who would have ever known that I would grow up to be named one of the top 100 leadership speakers by Inc. magazine, one of the top sales speakers, top 10 sales speakers in the world by Success magazine, and being personally mentored by and working with three of the greatest legends of our industry, John Maxwell, who I started out writing with in the early 2000s. And then I had a television show with Zig Ziglar, who is sort of the iconic
Yeah.
greatest, motivational speaker of all time. He and I had a TV show called True Performance. And then I spent 7 years working with Jim Rohn, who
Wow.
is legendary. I wrote his last book called 12 Pillars, and I worked with him for 7 years. He's also known for having given Tony Robbins his first job.
Yeah.
When Tony was 17, went to work for Jim. So I've had a great career. I'm in the Motivational Speakers Hall of Fame, 25 books in 14 languages, New York Times, Wall Street Journal bestselling book. But it's a long way from that crazy upbringing that I had. And the speaking industry has taken me all over the world. I've given 2,500 speeches all over the world to crowds as large as 25,000 people. And the speaking business is the greatest business in the world as far as I'm concerned. I love it because you get to make great money, get to travel the world, and you get to help people. And really, traveling the world and making lots of money is great. But when you die, the only thing that really lasts is the impact that you made on people's lives. And I love getting those emails and phone calls and things that say, what you said really helped me, really made a difference, really changed my life. And so I love the speaking industry. I love to help people find their voice.
I'm going to ask you this question because I want to start off with, deep, vulnerable, and authentic. Are you thankful for your upbringing and the role that has had in helping you be the speaker and the man you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. Some of us, we have really nice, lovely two-parent, suburban, white picket fence upbringings, and all those kinds of things. And those are great. And those train you to be in a particular way. But you can also find lessons in the tumultuous times. I mentioned that I went to 11 different schools. In fact, it's funny. I was just talking to one of my coaching clients earlier, and he grew up in a really bad home as well. And I said, going to 11 different schools, usually every year, year and a half, something like that, moving to a new school, I had to learn to walk into a room and make friends.
Hmm.
One of my best-selling books is a book called How to Talk to Anybody, Anytime, Anywhere. In fact, I have probably 3 or 4 different publishers that I receive royalties from for my books and audio programs. But the publisher that has How to Talk to Anybody, Anytime, Anywhere, he probably has 20 or 30 other of my programs and books and things like that. Fully one half of all of my royalties every quarter that I get from this publisher come from that one book, How to Talk to Anybody, Anytime, Anywhere.
Wow.
And I learned how to do it by moving every year and being thrust into the belly of the beast. Every year, year and a half, having to walk into a new school and having, I mean, I could have ended up a wallflower and just shrunk away and sat in the corner, but it taught me how to go talk to people to make friends. So, absolutely, the things that we experience, both positive and negative, are the kinds of things that, if you want them to, can make you a better person. And so I don't regret my upbringing. My dad died when I was 4, and it taught me to take life very seriously. And people say, what's your motivation for doing all the things that you've done? And I always go back to the fact that I think it was because my dad died when I was 4, and I realized that life is short and you only get one shot.
And for you and what you're doing now, with speaking, there doesn't sound like there's an easy button to push and you automatically become a fully fledged out, awesome credibility stack of a professional speaker. Um, Majority of people also, when we're growing up, no matter how kind of tumultuous of a youth we've had, we don't really understand the role of mentors. And so for you, when did you kind of have that realization? And it sounds like it's had a critical role in your life. When did you realize the power of mentors and kind of dive in to kind of get land the mentors that you've had that seem to have played a critical role in helping you become who you are today?
Sure thing. Yeah, in the mid 1990s, I hired a speaking coach, and I paid him $7,500 for the year. And this was like 30 years ago. Paid him 7,500 bucks, and I mean, it cut so much leverage or so much time off of my learning curve, and it gave me so much leverage. I'll give you an example, just the things you don't know. This is how long ago it was. When we first started, he said, send me a VHS tape of
Wow.
you speaking. That's how long ago this was.
Mm.
I sent him a VHS tape, and then we have a phone call. And I was on a landline. You probably don't even know what a landline is, Ryan. We used to have a cord that went into the wall for our phones. So anyway, we're on the phone, and he starts in and he says, man, I got to tell you, you're one of the best speakers I've ever heard. You're funny, you're dynamic, you're smart, you're sharp, you're quick, you're this, that. And I'm like, oh, yes, I am. And he says, and then he says to me, he says, what do you charge for a speech? And I said, $1,500. This is how long ago it was, 1995, 1904, 95, something like that. And I said, $1,500. He said, we have got to change your speaking fee. And I thought, oh man, I'm charging too much. I said, so what should I do? Like 500? He said, no, we're going to raise your fee. And I'm like, raise my fee? Wow. Okay. Why? And he said, because right now at $1,500, you're considered a throwaway speaker. When somebody finds you at $1,500, they go, well, he's only charging $1,500. He must not be that good. And I was like, wow, really? It's like you go in and there's, full, full leather purses, $10. And somebody goes, is it really a leather purse if it's only $10? Your fee has to match your ability and your experience and your resume. Another thing that he told me, and again, this was 30 years ago, he said, he was going on and on. You're amazing. You're great. You're this amazing speaker. Fantastic. Wonderful. Now what you need to know is it doesn't matter. And I go, what are you talking about? It doesn't matter. He goes, well, it matters because you got to be good. He said, but here's what you need to realize is there's going to be people who are not nearly as good at you as you at speaking, but they're much better than you at marketing.
Mhm.
And they're going to get the gig and you're not. And that audience is never going to hear your name and they're never going to know how good you were because somebody who wasn't as good as you was better at marketing than you. And so I realized that what I really needed to do, if I wanted to give my speeches, of which I'm really good at, I had to become even better at marketing. I had to be able to find um, conferences and meeting planners, and I had to give them good materials, and I had to have good printed materials. And of course, later on when we had websites, this was before websites, even for the most part, Ryan. I had to learn how to do that marketing so that they could see me and they could see me in action. They could send them the videos, like, those kinds of things. We used to have to send them VHS cassettes, and they would sit in a room and they would put in these VHS cassettes and watch. And then okay, next speaker, they'd pop it out, put another one in. So what a coach and a mentor can really do is cut your learning curve. And then of course, that was the guy that I paid. And then, being able to work with John Maxwell, who I actually just saw again last week. I haven't seen him for a few years, and we reconnected last week in Orlando. And of course, Jim Rohn and Zig Ziglar are both passed away now. But I learned a lot from working with Jim and Zig as extensively as I did, because those two guys could not have been more different personality-wise and style-wise, but they were two of the greatest legends of our industry. And what I really learned from working with both Jim and Zig was to be myself. I didn't have to be Zig Ziglar. I didn't have to be Jim Rohn. I had to be the best Chris Widener that I could possibly be. And so being around and being mentored or even being professionally coached by somebody is really powerful because you don't know what you don't know. They're going to cut your learning curve down and they're going to be able to give you advice that maybe somebody might not give you, but you need to hear.
Hmm. And for one thing that I've learned is some of the most successful people, they're always learning. It never stops. For someone at your level, what do you pay attention to and continue to learn from? Let's say in the past year, one thing you learned that proved absolutely critical to you and your speaking business that, a speaker must have already gone from 0 to 1 and 1 to 10. Now they're trying to go from 10 to 100. Those are the kind of problems I would foresee you having. What are you learning that's overcoming and solving those problems that you're having at your level right now?
I think, one of the things that's interesting is fee levels, right? And I'm at the higher end fee level. But what I've realized is that there are people who don't have my resume who are kind of catching up to my fee level. And so what I realize is that there are people being paid what I'm being paid now, and they don't have my resume, they don't have the books, the audio programs, things like that. But the market has caught up to my fee level so that people who aren't as experienced as I am are now charging what I charge. So what I've done is now I'm increasing my fee level. And so just understanding market forces is probably something that I constantly stay up on. What topics are important right now? I don't think that somebody ought to be changing their topics all the time. In fact, I remember when I used to belong to the National Speakers Association, they decided to rebrand themselves as experts who speak professionally. That was what NSA, and I don't know if they still call themselves that or not, but they call themselves experts who speak professionally. And then you would go on to the NSA website and you'd pick Joe Schmo, speaker Joe Schmo, and you'd go to a site and it says what he speaks on: diversity, leadership, motivation, customer service, and it's like 14 different topics. And I remember reaching out to the president of the NSA at the time, and I said, if we're going to be experts who speak professionally, I have a suggestion. And they said, what? And I said, you can only put two topics down. And he's like, why? And I said, because you can't be an expert on more than two topics. You can have a little bit of knowledge about 10 topics. You can't be an expert on 10 topics. You can be an expert maybe on two. But I consider myself an expert on one topic and one topic really only. I'm really good and higher than most at two or three others. And then I'm just completely average. I have never given a customer service speech ever. I refer them to my friends who are customer service experts. Now, I'll tell you, I could probably make a pretty wicked customer service speech because I know how to craft a speech. I'd probably do five horrible customer service experiences that I've had, make it really funny. I'd be funny. I'd tell funny stories. And then I'd probably close with like one really super powerful customer service. I could do it, but it doesn't serve me. It doesn't serve the client, doesn't serve the audience. And so I think it's important for us to niche down to one thing that we can become a world class expert on and not just jump from thing to thing to thing to thing.
Hmm. And you were mentioning to me before we kind of hopped on here about the some of the services that you offer to help these professional speakers. Can you mention a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a 1 year program. It's 2 calls every month. And then I also do what I call anytime coaching, which means in between the calls, if you got a quick call or something like that, you shoot me a text and say, hey, you got a couple minutes? If I have a couple minutes, I'll just call you. I won't even respond. Right. So maybe you've just put up a new page on your website. You want me to take a look at it. Maybe you just got a request to come and speak, but they don't have your budget. So I help you figure out how to, propose your budget and those kinds of things. But in this 1 year, we start out with your positioning. Who are you in the marketplace? Because if you don't know who you are in the marketplace, and if you don't have a specific position in the marketplace, nobody will know where to fit you in. And what you want to do is you want to create a position in the marketplace where you are the go-to expert when they are looking for that particular kind of speaker. And so we help you craft your positioning, your branding. We help you with your website, your marketing, your crafting of your speech, because you have to craft a really great speech. We help you with your delivery of your speech. We help you with your marketing assets. We help you with your social media, with your book. We help you monetize. Every piece of information can be delivered in a very wide variety of different ways. For example, I wrote a book called 12 Pillars with Jim Rohn. So let's look at the ways that I could teach 12 pillars. Well, I could do an article. How much do you make for an article? Nothing, unless maybe some magazine pay you $100 or something like that. How much money do I make on the book? Well, you might make $1.50 every time the book sells. But what if you do an audio program? Well, we sell the audio program, I think, for $69. Okay, well, what do you do if you develop a course? Well, you might be able to get $495 out of a course. How much do you get to show up and do a workshop, like a half-day workshop on the 12 pillars? Well, you might make $7,500, unless you're the one who puts the workshop on and you charge everybody $500 to be there and you have 100 people. Well, now you made a bunch more. How much do you get paid to do a 12 pillars keynote? Well, you might make, depending upon your fee, you might make 10, 20, 30, 40, $50,000. But it's all the same information. So we teach you about how to monetize the information that you have across a wide variety of formats. We teach you how to build your own tribe, because frankly, I think at this point, when the National Speakers Association started back in the 70s, there was 100 members. Well, now there's probably 1,500 members, and there's probably 10,000 former members. And in fact, if I had to guess, there's probably 15 to 20,000 former members of the National Speakers Association. I talked to one speakers bureau that has 20,000 speakers in their database. Wow. Really, really, really difficult to break in and just become a keynote speaker unless, you just won an Olympic gold medal, or you're the CEO of some well-known company, or, something like that. I think the real money and the real impact to be made in the speaking industry now is to create your own tribe, do your own conferences. People like John Maxwell. Maxwell still gets paid to go give his keynotes, but the amount of money, even though he charges an exorbitant amount of money, like, John's like $100,000 if you want him just to come in and speak at your conference. But what he has made with his certification program, and now they've got a publishing company, it dwarfs the actual fee. I went down, they invited me down to come down as their guest to a small event. Well, it was actually a large event. It was like 3,000 people. It was their coaches. But then they did a small event kind of in a back room for like 50 of us. And most of the people paid, a few $1,000s to be in that room. And so, they took $125,000 just out of that room in the smaller mastermind. But then I don't know what they charged for the 3,000, 4,000 people that were out in the main room. But let's call it, $1,000 to be there. Well, you start doing the math, 3,000 people times $1,000, way more taking out of your tribe than if getting hired to go give one speech one time at one company. So I really think, and I encourage most people to develop their own tribe and then learn how to monetize that tribe. There's an old theory called the 1,000 fans theory. If you can get 1,000 people to give you $1,000 a year, it's $1 million a year speaking business.
Now, asking a more tactical question on that, how would you recommend someone develop their tribe and then monetize it?
Well, I'll give you an example. My son is 34 years old, Chris Widener Jr. And I said, brother, you got a great name. I've already done all the hard work for 40 years to put your name into the marketplace. So my son went into real estate development. And right now he's probably working on, I don't know, $50 million worth of deals or something like that. He builds apartment complexes, duplexes, fourplexes. He flips homes, all these kinds of things. So after 10 years of me telling him he needs to write a book, my son finally wrote his first book. It's called First Door Down, I believe is what it's called. First Door Down. And the subtitle is a step-by-step guide to buy your first investment property. So it's your first door. I've got my first door down, right? I got my first door.
Yeah.
And he started out, the very first thing he bought was a duplex. That was the very first thing that he ever bought, was a duplex. And so what he's doing now is he's building a Facebook community around young people who want to learn how to get into real estate investment. So he's now, and he'll spend money on advertising the Facebook page. They come into the Facebook page. He keeps that Facebook page alive and growing and vibrant, asking lots of good questions and those kinds of things. And what he's doing is he's selling them the book. He's selling coaching. Eventually, he's going to put on a conference. Eventually, he's going to put together. I know a bunch of people in the real estate industry, and they make a lot of money on masterminds. And what happens is about half their audience are investors, wealthy doctors, wealthy business people, wealthy attorneys, things like that, who are looking for a place to put their money. And the other half of the people who show up are all people who do house flippings and they buy apartment complexes and those kinds of things. So that's exactly what I would do is I would find your niche, create a brand, position yourself in the marketplace, start creating that value for, start out with hundreds of people, then thousands of people, then tens of thousands of people. And then you put them into the funnel. At the top of the funnel, you got maybe 10,000 people. And, maybe they're paying you a couple bucks a month, $5 a month to belong to your community, whatever. And then you get the people who want to take a course from you. You develop a course and, you might have 1,000 people that pay you $500 for your course. A lot of money. And then you put down that mastermind of $10,000 or $25,000 where people are paying you to come and to be in that room with those other successful people. One of the most successful guys I know in the speaking business, he owns a mastermind company. He told me once that he has 25 people who pay him $100,000 a year for a mastermind. He has 125 people who pay him $25,000 a year to be in a different mastermind. And he has 400 people that pay him $10,000 a year to be in his mastermind. You do that math, and it's like $9 million a year that he's doing just in masterminds. And so, but he's got his tribe, and they pay him a lot of money to belong to that tribe.
Hmm. And how did you make the decision way back when to be a speaker? And I asked that question within the back of my head. There's a lot of people that have amazing stories and amazing things that need to be spread to change the lives they're meant to spread, but they're scared, very scared to speak, and they just don't know, is it worth it taking me this first step? Should I do this? I'm really scared of speaking. Should I do this? What guidance would you kind of give to them leveraging your, first opportunities speaking and making that decision?
Well, this is a question that I can't really answer from experience, and I'll tell you why. I am a naturally gifted speaker. I have not had to work at it hard. I do work at it. I work at my technique. I monitor how people and crowds respond to jokes and information. If it doesn't work, out the door it goes. But I've always been naturally gifted. When I was young, my mom bought me something you've probably never heard of. It's called a Mr. Microphone. It was a microphone that had a little wire at the bottom and it connected to your FM radio station. And it was always like super high on the dial, like 106.5 or something like that. And you could turn your radio to 106.5, turn this thing on, and you came out of the speakers. It was the worst thing my mother ever did for herself, was buying me a microphone in the 5th grade. My mother would come home from work. She'd open the door exhausted from a day at work, and there would be me. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, let's welcome Charlotte Widener home from work. Put your hands together. She'd be like, oh my gosh, can you just leave me alone? You remember in high school when the homeroom, the buzzer went off, and then the kid on the announcements came on and said, okay, today we've got fish sticks and tater tots for breakfast, and the JV football team, you need to be at the bus by 4:00 for your game. That was me. So let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I did that, right? But I'll tell you, I was probably 15 years old, 16 years old. I bought a book. And the book was called Put Your Money Where Your Mouth Is: How to Make a Fortune as a Public Speaker. Now, I'm telling you, I don't know where that book is. It's in some box somewhere. None of that stuff is relevant anymore, probably, because it was like written in the 1980s. before websites, before email, before online video, before social media, all that kind of stuff. Um, but I was thinking about how to be a speaker when I was in high school. And the funny thing is, when I started getting paid pretty decent money, when I was getting 5,000 or 7,500 for a speech, I remember my mother asking me, how much you get paid. And I told her, and she said, I can't believe that people pay you to do what I told you all those years to stop. In college, I did college. I was the guy in the college basketball arena sitting courtside who did the starting lineups and let's stand for the national anthem. Now shooting 2 free throws, Johnny Jones. I've always done that. I've done radio. I've done drive time radio. I've done television. So in a way, I'm not really good for this, but I do know how to get it done. And I would say, first and foremost, is if you are absolutely terrified of speaking, that's pretty hard to overcome. If you're scared of speaking, you can overcome that. You can overcome that with knowledge and you can overcome that with technique. When people say, how do you overcome stage fright? I always tell them, know your stuff cold. Know your stuff. I mean, just know your stuff. I'll give you an example. I was given a speech back in the 90s, I think, in Seattle, Washington. It was a 30-minute speech. I was the last speaker. I was done. I still had my mic in my hand. Guy comes up to me, goes, how can you do a 30-minute speech with no notes? And I said, man, I just know my stuff. And I said, I bet you could give a 30-minute speech with no notes. Oh, I could never give a 30-minute speech with no notes. I said, sure you could. Who do you work for? He said, I work for Boeing. And I said, well, what do you do at Boeing? He said, I'm an engineer. I said, what are you working on? And this will tell you about what year it was. You can go and look. It was before they had released the Boeing 777. And he said, I am working on wing design for the Boeing 777. I said, okay, if your life depended on it, and I handed you this microphone, could you give me 30 minutes on wing design and lift and aerodynamics and the greater understanding of how airplanes fly? Oh yeah, I could do that. I said, see, it's all about knowing your stuff. If you can always tell somebody who's afraid because they kind of get that look. Like sometimes politicians will get answered a question or they'll get asked a question and you can see it in their eyes. They have no clue what they're talking about, right?
Yeah.
And they're like, how do I just get out of this? Well, what we're going to do is, and then they just talk about the flag in America, right? Because they have no clue what they're talking about when it comes to like a policy issue. So I would say if you're terrified, the first thing you should do is just know your information better than anybody. The second thing that I would tell people, and I tell people about stage fright, is particularly those of you maybe aren't professional speakers, but you're like a VP at your company or something. I get calls every now and then from like a VP or somebody, and they're like, I just got asked to give this speech at my conference, and I don't know what to do. And here's what I tell them: listen, nobody expects you to be any good at all. Nobody. Nobody's sitting in the back going, well, this guy sucks. He's terrible, because you're not a professional speaker. If you pay me $50,000 to show up and give a speech, you better expect me to be good. If you're paying somebody to come in, they need to be good. But if you're one of the people from work, I guarantee you, they are not sitting up there going, I wonder why he's no good. You know what they're thinking? They're thinking, I'm glad they asked him to speak and not me, because they are even more terrified than you are at being up on the stage. So if you're somebody who's being asked to speak, or you're speaking as part of your sort of non-speaking profession, first thing you need to realize is nobody's expecting you to be Tony Robbins. Nobody's expecting you to put coal on the floor and do a coal walk. Like, they're expecting you to be able to get through it and have a humorous joke and that kind of thing. And they're going to come up to you afterwards and go, wow, Joe, you did a great job. That was awesome. Good for you. Good for you. You made it through without anybody walking out the back door. A professional speaker, they need to be really, really good. So I think a lot of it is managing your information, managing your internal talk and your thinking and those kinds of things. And then frankly, just practice. You're going to get better. I started out really, really good. I'm world class now, but it's 2,500 speeches all around the globe. Sometimes, there are some disasters that happen. When I was working with Jim Rohn, I got a call once from a group in New Mexico, or not New Mexico, El Paso, Texas. And they said, we want you to come in. We're going to have 500 people for an event. Perfect. Great. No problem. About a month out, we called them and we said, hey, we're starting to get ready. What we're going to ship, books and audio programs. You still looking at 500, but no, it's going to be more like 300 people. Okay. We call them up 2 weeks out. Oh boy, ticket sales are, 100 people. We're looking at 100 people. So we shipped enough product for 100 people. I kid you not, Ryan. I showed up. The room was set for 500 people. There were 3 people there.
Wow.
I gave a 3-hour seminar to 3 people in a room with 500 chairs in it. Now, I've also given speeches to 25,000 people where the whole place was completely jam-packed, and we had 14, interpreters. It was in Europe. We had 14 interpreters who were doing live, moment by moment interpretation for the people in the audience. But every single speech, I've gotten better and better. And if you decide that you're going to learn from your speaking engagements, like I've had people that have seen me, my wife has seen me hundreds and hundreds of times give speeches. You know what the first thing I do every time I'm done with a speech, if I'm with somebody who's seen me give it before? How did I do? Anything I should change? Anything that I faltered on? What were the good parts? What did you like? What did you not like? I'm constantly trying to get feedback on what my speech was like. Now, my speeches, I'm a keynoter, right? So my speeches are 99% the same every single time I give them because I'm going from group to group to group to group, right? And they've not heard my speech before. And so I can perfect it and I can hone it and I can make it as good as it can possibly get. I remember one time, I don't remember what the joke was, but for about 6 speeches, I started out with the same joke. And I'm telling you, Ryan, it was funny. It was funny. The only problem is nobody in the audience thought it was funny. In fact, I would tell the joke and I'm looking at the audience and I'm thinking, I didn't say it, but I'm thinking, what's wrong with you people? That was funny. Like, that was funny. That's a funny joke. How can you not laugh? Are you dumb? Do you not get it? Like, that's funny. And you don't think it's funny. I'm thinking this in my head while I'm giving my speech. Well, after about 6 times, I thought, nobody thinks this joke is funny except you, Chris. Out the door it went. Never used it again. So it's constantly monitoring, getting feedback, asking people, listening to people when they tell you what worked and what didn't work. You're going to find sometimes you're going to say something that people just think is hilarious and you wouldn't necessarily think it is. You keep those. You're going to tell people things that you think is funny and nobody laughs. You want to get rid of those. And so, crafting your speech is very, very important. One of the things that I teach people, and I actually learned this working with politicians. I work with quite a few politicians and I help them speech coaching and message crafting. I learned in college that the average speaker cannot keep anybody's attention more than for about 18 minutes. Only the top people in the world can keep somebody's attention fully for more than about 18 minutes. But what you have to do is, and I'll start like this. If we were talking and doing this and I just talked like this and I didn't ever change the tone of my voice, well, Ryan, thank you so much for having me. Let me tell you how I started my career. My career has been really exciting and it's been very interesting and I've traveled the world. They'd be done after about 2 minutes, right? And so what you're seeing me do is there's times I'm leaning in, there's times I'm talking, there's times I'm low, there's times I slow it down, there's times I'm moving my hands around. What that's doing is it's triggering the response mechanism of the brain of the listener to constantly be they're kind of having to like, okay, what's going on? And their brain is being drawn in because they have to pay attention. So one of the things I did with politicians, and I do it with professional speakers now, is there's a range of emotions that people go through. They can laugh uproariously. They can be very concerned and listen. They can be clapping like you've got applause lines. They can be pumping their fists. What you want to do is you want to craft your speech so that you're taking people through this emotional roller coaster. Because even if you have them laughing all the time, it's not good. If you just have them serious all the time, it's not good. But I'll tell you, one of the best things that I've learned is that humor opens people up. I had a kid from high school come and hear me speak one time, 4 or 5 years into my speaking profession. Kid from high school, friend of mine from high school. He came and heard me give a speech because I was back in my hometown. And his name was Roy. I finally told Roy this about a year ago. We were on the phone and I told him, I said, I tell everybody this story. I don't think I've ever told you this. He didn't even remember what I'm about to tell you. Roy came up to me after one of my speeches that he heard, and he said, "You know what would make you world class?" I said, "What?" He said, "If you were as funny on stage as you are off stage." I went, "Really?" And what I realized was, Ryan, I was trying to be the professional speaker. I was trying to be profound and, all of these kinds of things. And I realized, you know what? I need to be myself, and I'm funny. I like to goof around. I like to be funny. What I realized is humor opens people up. And I mean that both literally and figuratively. So humor literally makes people open up. How so? When you tell something really funny, what does the body do? It does this. They laugh. They literally open themselves up. And the bodily reflection is what's happening internally. It opens them up. So in my speeches, I have crafted my speeches where I get people to laugh and then I stick the knife right in them. And I'll give you an example. So I have a story that I tell about my daughter when she was 14 years old. I'll try and make it short. She went to work as a barista. She starts bringing home, $20 a day in tips, then $50 a day in tips. Then she starts bringing home like $75 a day in tips. She's 14 years old. So I call her into my office and I said, "Hannah," she's sitting at my table. And I said, "Hannah, I got a question for you." um, um, you're just selling coffee up there, right? And everybody kind of chuckles because I'm sort of insinuating she's selling drugs or something, and that's how she's making $75 a day as a 14-year-old. And so I get people to laugh, and she says, "No, Dad, you know what I realized about people? People love to talk about themselves." So she said, "I used to just take their money and I wouldn't talk to them. I'd take their order, I'd make their drink, I wouldn't talk to them. They'd give me their money. I'd give them their change, and a little bit of their change went into the tip jar." She said, "But now what I've realized is, Dad, if I ask them questions about themselves the entire time I'm making their drink, I see you come in here. You must work around here. What do you do? How long have you worked there? Did you go to college for that? I see you're married. You're wearing a wedding ring. Are you married? What does your wife do? Where does she work? Blah, blah, blah. Oh, do you have children? Oh, how was little Johnny's soccer game? How was little Susie's t-ball game?" On and on. All I do, she says, "Now, Dad, I ask them questions about themselves. I get them talking about themselves. And now I give them the drink. They give me their money. I give them the change. And all the change goes in the tip jar." And then I say this. I say, "Now, in a way, it's kind of sick. Because now I found out that my 14-year-old daughter knows how to manipulate 50-year-old men for money." And of course, just like you just did, you chuckle. And I say, You've opened yourself up, Ryan. I saw you. I looked at you because I wanted to see if you chuckled. That's what happens. Everybody chuckles and they kind of open up a little bit. And I go, "But you know what? There's a deep spiritual truth right there. These 50-year-old men don't even know it, but they are over tipping somebody simply because that person was interested in them. Nobody asked them these kinds of questions. In our daily life, nobody's asking us other than, "Hey, Bob, how you doing?" "Doing great. How are you doing, Sam?" "I'm doing great too. See you tomorrow." When we both ask each other, "How are you doing today, Bob?" "I'm doing great today, Tom." Right? And so here's this little barista who figured out this deep-seated need in people to connect with another human being, to be known by another human being, right? And so, how do I set them up to slide that deep spiritual truth in? I get them to laugh first. So, what I help people with is crafting that speech so that they're running through laughing, to listening, to thinking, to maybe even being angry about something. And you know what that does? It keeps their brain engaged. And that's one of the things that you can do to become world class is to craft that speech so that you're running your audience through that emotional roller coaster that keeps them engaged. And you might not even be the best speaker in the world, the best natural speaker in the world, but if you can craft it and deliver it and learn from it and get better at it, you'll be better than somebody who is naturally gifted speaker who's just winging it every time they get up there.
Where can people find you on the internet? You're dropping this gold. People want to listen to more. Where can they find you?
They can find me at chriswidener.com. I got some stuff there. You can see one of my courses. You can click on the books. You can go see at Amazon. I've got a page, where it's got all my books, dozens of books and audio programs and all that. If people are interested in having me coach them in speaking, they can reach out to me. It's just chris@chriswidener.com. And if you want to see me, you can go to just Google my name, Chris Widener, and hit the video tab. You'll see what I looked like 40 pounds lighter and 30 years younger, all that kind of stuff. But no, I would love to connect with your audience. And I'll tell you, I love the speaking business because speaking is how you make a difference. Think about the great speeches, even just in American history. 407 years ago, the Gettysburg Address. And you know what? Abraham Lincoln didn't think anybody was going to remember that. In fact, it's part of the Gettysburg speech where he says, fourscore and 7 years ago, blah, blah, blah. And he talks about how years from now, nobody will remember what happened here today. But you know what? Everybody remembers. Why? Because of a speech. You think of John F. Kennedy, we're post World War II, we're coming into the 60s, and ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. Think about Martin Luther King Jr., right? I have a dream one day when little black children and little white children. Think about Ronald Reagan, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall, opened up the lives for hundreds of millions of people because of a speech. And I guess I would probably close with this. The best piece of advice I ever got was to be a voice, not an echo. Now that has been proclaimed that Albert Einstein said it. It doesn't seem to me like Albert Einstein would say something like that, but that's who tends to be. Abraham Lincoln and Albert Einstein tend to get credit for all the quotes that nobody can figure out where they came from. But I will tell you this, there's enough people regurgitating what somebody else is saying. Be a voice, not an echo. Learn your own stuff. Think your own issues. Come up with your own way of saying something, because that's the kind of thing that really changes people's lives. Just echoing somebody else's stuff, it's never going to change somebody's life, or it might, because they're going to go listen to the other guy and that person's going to change their life. So be a voice, not an echo. Every person has a unique perspective. Every person has a unique voice. Every person has a unique experience. Like I said, I grew up in a very dysfunctional, at-risk home, but there's people who come from homes that were wonderfully beautiful with two parents who loved each other. And you also have things that you can learn and teach other people. So I love the business. I love making a difference, and I love helping people make a difference in other people's lives as well.
Well, Chris, thanks for taking the time to do this. And guys, if you're listening, that one main takeaway I'm going to remember: be a voice, not an echo. And if you found what he's been saying and sharing with you valuable, you know where to find him. If you do have a friend or a colleague that's looking to grow their speaking business in ways that they don't even know how, You guys got Chris. You know, he knows what he's doing. And guys, thank you for listening. Chris, thanks for making this experience happen. Cheers,
Thanks
y'all.
for having me.